Today on Locked On Canadiens, Carey Price does not get the call to the Hall just yet. We'll tell you why it kind of makes sense and why we hate it, as well as looking into draft week even further and whether or not the Canadiens should trade up in the first round.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into episode 1338 of Locked On Canadiens. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day and for subscribing wherever you get your podcast. Doing that supports us here on the show and ensures you do not miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. My name is Ian Boisvert, also known as that. Maybe it's Ian. You may know me from my times blogging at Rabbit Habs or on the Build podcast. And I'm joined, as I always am, by Laura Saba, also known as the Actor Stick. You may know her from her time at Habs Ice on the Prize in the blogging world, and then as the producer of Hockey Primetime. Laura, how are we doing today on this day where we got some pretty dumb news from the hockey world, if we can be honest?
Yes, it was, honestly, it was shocking and not surprising both at the same time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, we'll get into it. We're going to spend a good portion of this show talking about Carey Price not getting the call to the Hall in his first year of eligibility. We'll talk about why maybe it kind of makes some sense and also why we hate it. Because I think as people who have watched this team and watched the totality of Carey Price's career, we are entitled to that belief. We are entitled to the emotions that we feel in this moment. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll finish up with a draft week segment. I want to talk about trading up in the first round. We've talked about the Canadiens, who they might pick in the range that they're in. We've talked about the kinds of players they might go for, but maybe there's a player that starts to slide a little bit and the Canadiens might be interested in moving up. So we'll talk about that possibility as well. But let's start with the news of the day. It's so NHL. It's so hockey to just turn a random Tuesday into just a fireball of news for one specific fan base. And that's kind of what happened on Tuesday afternoon. The Hockey Hall of Fame announced their class of 2025. Going into the Hall are Zdeno Chara, Brianna Decker, Jennifer Botterill, Duncan Keith, Alexander Mogilny, and Joe Thornton. As far as NHL goes, Chara, Keith, and Thornton were in their first year of eligibility. McGillney's been kicking around for a while. Kind of like, aside from the fact that our guy didn't make it in on his first time, I'm glad McGillney's case is over. I'm glad we're done going, this guy needs to be in the Hall. We don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, because it's been like, what, 20 years that we've been doing this? It's been
insane.
Ridiculous. Like, and 20 years ago, it was a big snub. Him and Jennifer Botterill, I think that was really, really, we're glad for them because they were missed. And also, in the past, the Hockey Hall of Fame has had, room for a number of women, and they just didn't vote for anybody. So like those spots were just like left empty. Whereas this time around, they had Danielle Sauvageau as a builder, which is, incredibly well-deserved. They had Jennifer Botterill, Brianna Decker. Like, this time around, I feel like they righted a lot of wrongs, which I don't necessarily think that they were, they set out to do that. I just think that it finally hit them that it's time for all.
Yeah, it's funny you say they righted a lot of wrongs, but in turn, they might have created one. Carey Price not getting the call in his first year of eligibility. I think you said it perfectly at the beginning. It was kind of shocking, but also not really. We had kind of always thought that there was a chance he doesn't get in on the first pass. So this first segment, let's spend this on, why it kind of makes sense that he didn't get the call this time around. And actually, I'm excited for him to make it next summer, in the summer of 26. And the reason I think that makes a lot of sense is he's headed into the last year of that contract. It'll be very symbolic that at the end of that contract, he can finally actually retire. He can announce his real retirement, get the accolades this year that he deserves from, the Bell Center crowd. I'm sure they would do something for him towards the end of the season or, at the beginning of next season to honor him for that. But also, like, it then turns it into a summer of Carey Price. Like, we get to be very excited going into next season, the following season, getting ready to see him get inducted and maybe the Canadiens would play in the Hall of Fame game, because Montreal rarely plays in that game. It's in Toronto every year when they do the inductions. And sometimes they like to make it they like to put a team there who had some kind of skin in that selection. So I think from an optimist standpoint, he's going to get in eventually. I hope it's next year. Him being out longer than 2 years is kind of unconscionable at this point. And we'll go over the resume in the second segment. But I think just maybe I'm too optimistic. Maybe this is copium and hopium and all of those things that, the worst people online like to use as terms to make you feel bad about yourself. But I think that could be a really nice story for the Canadiens next year.
I think it's really telling that it's not just Canadiens fans that think this is a snub. Now, I have to be very clear on this. There's a lot of people who do think that this is correct, that he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer. And a very large number of them are Toronto Maple Leafs fans. Sure. And considering the number of Toronto Maple Leafs that they put in the Hall, given that they never won anything, I think that's a little bit unconscionable for them to do that, right? And so, but then generally, as a whole, there are people who have watched the NHL over the last 20 years, who really do think that this is, I wouldn't say unconscionable, but they disagree with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a large part of it, unfortunately, has to do with comparison to other players, right? Like the question is, why did Duncan Keith get in and not Carey Price or anything like that? But it's not just Habs fans that think this is incorrect. It's that Habs fans as a whole, and I think we have the right to, we're the most upset, right? Or we are actively upset, whereas those people are maybe not upset, but they're like, that doesn't make sense, right?
Sure.
And so I think it's pretty telling that, he is seen as one of the best goaltenders. And I think one of the biggest things that people are forgetting, the same people that are saying, oh, it makes sense that he's not in, or some people are even saying he's not a Hall of Famer, which I don't even want to begin to talk about that part.
That is a disqualifying
Absolutely
take.
wild.
You don't need to listen to that person anymore.
Right? But those same people were crapping their pants whenever their teams had to face Carey Price in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I think you have to remember that. You have to remember the Carey Price factor in every single game, right? Because if you look, it's like, oh, well, he won all his awards all in one season. Yes, but at the same time, how many seasons did he drag the team into the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
How many seasons was he the only good thing on the Montreal Canadiens? How many seasons, were your teams not able to beat him, right?
Yeah.
You have to think about that too. You have to think about his overall play. They're like, well, his save percentage is the same as this guy and this guy and this, and those guys are all Hall of Famers, right?
Yeah, look, I want to make the case for Carey Price. I really do. And we're going to do that. I need to get the rails back on this, because the one thing that I think he has against him is the fact that he is a peak player, not a duration player. And that's that is a big sort of contention in all of sports, to see, if it is a sport that you can play for an extended period of time, can you get in just based on a few years where you were on top of the world and the rest you were just okay?
But the thing is, he wasn't just okay.
Right. No, he was fine in those other years. I totally agree with you. And I'll make the case for him in the second segment, but his injuries made this hard for them to vote on. Just from the games played standpoint, from the wins standpoint, it kind of it's challenging to do that. I will say, there are 41 goalies in the Hockey Hall of Fame. 11 of them have been inducted in the last 25 years. And there's only 2 in there currently that I would consider contemporaries of Carey Price, guys that we would watch Carey Price play against. The one I don't count is Martin Brodeur, because he was playing playoff games before I was born, and that doesn't count to me. But I want to make the case for him in a moment. But the last thing I want to do in this segment is, are we certain he gets in next year? Because I want to read to you the people who are eligible for the first time in 2026, as well as some who are still lingering on eligibility. Patrice Bergeron, Phil Kessel, and Eric Stahl are to go in next year at the earliest. I think Patrice Bergeron is a home run, tap in. He's going in the first ballot. The guy, he has the resume and he has the reputation, and everybody loves that guy. He's in. Phil Kessel, I don't think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think he's one of the funniest Hall of Famers of all time if he gets in, and I really hope he does, because it's really funny. And Eric Stahl is sort of a coin flip. I don't know that he's getting in as a first ballot. He might make it eventually as a compiler, but I don't know that he's a first ballot. Others that are still eligible: Patrick Marleau, Pekka Rinne, Ryan Miller, Ryan Getzlaf, Tuukka Rask, Jason Spezza, PK Subban. I put PK Subban in there because it's funny. There's no shot he's making it, but it's just funny that we're at this point of our lives where guys that we watch play are eligible for the Hall of Fame. I believe Thomas Plekanec is also eligible next year. I didn't put him because I don't think Plecky's making it in. So with all of that information, are you certain that Carey Price gets in next year?
I am maybe 80% sure.
I think he's in. I think Bergeron is a tap in. I think he'll go in with Patrick Marleau. Patrick Marleau's not in, right? I didn't see him on there. I looked at the last couple of years.
Because somebody did point out that next year it could be him, Bergeron, and Marleau.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's most likely, quite honestly. Yeah. All right, we'll leave the case against Carey Price here. When we come back, this will be emotionally charged, and we will talk about why this player should have absolutely been a first ballot Hall of Famer, and we'll get to that in just a moment.
Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Reminisce Ready. Reminisce Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Remisse's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Reminisce might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. I love that it's completely online. Reminisce connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to regiet.com/LockedOnNHL and use code LockedOnNHL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL and use promo code LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Reminisce website for full safety information.
All right, we are back, and it's time to get mad, Laura. I kind of had to pull Laura back there in the first segment because I needed to make the points clear. I am going to unleash Laura Saba on the world for a moment here. Laura, tell him why you mad. Why are you mad that Carey Price did not get into the Hall of Fame on his first ballot?
Because I think if he wasn't a Montreal Canadian, he would have gotten in. I think that's the first thing.
Explain.
I'll tell you why. Because I think there's something about this team where it's like they've had enough greatness. They're great in name only, right? Like they're coasting on a brand from 1530, like I can't say 15 anymore. It's 30 plus years ago, right?
Yeah.
That's what the perception is that Montreal is a brand name with no substance behind it, right? So Carey Price has that working against him. And I think that if he were, and I'm going to say this is me being honest. If he were in a franchise that was less relevant in history, this accomplishment would have been given so much more weight, right? I think that that's really, really important. I think another thing too is that it's not Carey Price's fault that he got Chris Kreider. It's not Carey Price's fault that he had those injuries. You have to look at the rest of the quality of the team as well. You can say a lot of things, right? Like there are so many goalies that have had one and done seasons that we never heard from again, right? Like they were guys who made their name on a season and then they got signed to contracts they weren't worth. Like a couple years later, you would see they were working in Europe or they had to retire, et cetera, et cetera. They had one good run. Their team got a cup, blah, blah, blah. Carey Price, I think, and I know you made that argument saying like, it's more peak versus longevity, but I think that you just have to look at some of the saves that he's made. If you're comparing him to other goalies, can all of them make saves like that? I don't think so. Like Carey Price, and part of the reason we talk about the Hall of Fame too is that it's always about like cups. Like if you look at all the people that won, it was like, okay, Joe Thornton, unfortunate, but Duncan Keith has 3 cups. Duncan Keith helped cover up a sexual assault, right? At the very least, he didn't do anything about it and pretended he didn't know. If he
Well, they
wasn't part
call
of
it
a
the Hall
cover-up.
of Fame and not the Hall of Good Guys, right? Like
Right.
there's
You,
a laundry list of guys who we could go through, and it's not
you know,
not a
like,
particularly fun exercise.
yeah.
Um,
And then there's something about too, like players that like mainstream hockey loves to tout, right? Like a Shea Weber. I love Shea Weber,
yeah,
right? But like him getting in before Carey Price, him getting in and Carey Price not getting in, like it just to me, it does not make sense. And then we constantly say it is the Hockey Hall of Fame, not the NHL Hall of Fame. Well, like, well, okay, well, he backstopped Canada and Canada stacked. And I'm like, but you don't make that argument against any other Team Canada player, right?
yeah. He
You only
backstopped
make it
Canada
against
in
Sochi.
the Olympics in Sochi.
Yeah,
The gold medal game was 1-0, if I remember correctly. He posted a shutout in the gold medal game. Like,
but
it's
it's
easy
behind
to look
Canada.
back
It
and
doesn't count.
right, yeah. Look, I mean, so I mentioned that he has some contemporaries that have made
Yes.
the Hall of Fame. The two guys that I'm thinking of are Henrik Lundqvist and Roberto Luongo. So I
Okay.
looked through a lot of their stats and compiled them together. The obvious difference between these three guys is that Carey Price just didn't play a lot of games. He didn't play as many as those guys did. I mean, Luongo had over 1,000 games as a goalie. That's pretty incredible. I hate to do this, but why did Nick Suzuki not make Team Canada at Four Nations?
Because
Because he didn't go to Worlds, right? Carey Price, the only international sort of hardware that's missing between the three of them and Carey Price is a World Championship medal. He did not participate in a winning World Championship team. I'm obviously kidding. Like that's true that did happen. But you look down this, like Henrik Lundqvist did not have a heart. He never won a Jennings Trophy for the best goaltending stats in the league. Luongo never won a Hart or a Vezina. He had a Jennings, but not a Vezina for top goalie in the league, especially playing as long as he did. The numbers are all pretty similar. Save percentage 917, 918, 919 across the board is pretty, that's very similar. I think that where I go with this, though, is that it just seems a little inconsistent with the way that they decided that Lundqvist and Luongo were both first ballots. And I think Carey Price is just a victim of this being a particularly strong year.
Yeah.
And also the year they finally decided Alexander McGillney gets in. Like, it was like of all years for him to finally get the call, it's this one.
Yeah.
Again, every person that went in on their resume, they are worthy of getting into the Hall of Fame. I don't want this to turn into a whole like, oh, those other guys are crap. It's not true.
No,
Like
no.
they don't put bad players in the Hall of Fame. Like it's not, doesn't happen.
But that was the thing. Like all three of these players that we're talking about were considered the best goaltenders in the world at one time, right?
Right.
Henrik Lundqvist was before Carey Price came along, or before Carey Price's resurgence. And the thing is, they talk about the hardware a lot. There's only one thing, I guess two things now that he hasn't won. He's won the Calder Cup, right?
Yeah.
He's won all kinds of things. So to me, like watching this happen, knowing that people have changed the way that they play in order to emulate Carey Price, that's the part that hurts, right? Because if you're talking about Hall of Fame and you're talking about one of the reasons people get voted in is did they do anything that had an impact on their sport or on their particular position? And Carey Price did. And I think that's the part that really sucks, is that Carey Price really did. So obviously, I am all up in my feelings about this. I do think that Carey Price is a Hall of Famer. I personally think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. But I think the part of it too is that we talked about it a couple weeks ago. Every time you ask the NHL players who they didn't want to face, they didn't say Henrik Lundqvist. They didn't say Roberto Luongo. They all said Carey Price, even after his prime.
I think to the bubble year, right, where they came back after the pause and the NHL unveiled the playoff format where there was qualifying rounds and the Canadiens were set to play the Penguins in qualifying rounds. And I'll always remember that a team that had Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin complained to the NHL because they thought it was unfair that they had to play Carey Price in a best of 3 series, because they thought like, well, he gets hot a couple games or he's just Carey Price a couple games and we're out of the tournament. And they were kind of right to be like that. But also you have 2 definite first ballot Hall of Famers in Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby on that roster. You shouldn't be worried about a goalie. As great a goalie as Carey Price is, like, come on, like that. We know that Canadiens team should have lost in that bubble play-in game.
How many playoff series do we know the Canadiens should have lost in, right? Like that's the other part of this, is that Carey Price kept them in or dragged them up, right? So anyway,
I think,
I have so many feelings.
I know, and the one thing that I thought was interesting, I looked at playoff wins. 43 for Price, 61 for Lundqvist, 34 for Luongo. He played that long and just never played a ton of playoff games. I would almost half of those were in one season in 2011. You know, so like he was a compiler in a sense that he put up a lot of numbers. And again, these are Lundqvist and Luongo, definite first ballot Hall of Famers. Like I think what knocked Price down was Chris Kreider going into his knee. And I think it's an unfortunate truth that we'll have to live with, but he's going to get in. I wouldn't worry about this too much. You know who's not worried about this at all?
Carey Price.
He is somewhere hunting. He's in a tree wearing camo, waiting for some unsuspecting animal to come up to a feeder. Like he does. I cannot believe that Carey Price cares one iota about whether or not he was a first ballot Hall of Famer or if he'll be a second one. He'll make the trip to Toronto when he needs to. Otherwise, he's cool just chilling. And I think we should all just be cool chilling. All right. We'll leave this there. When we come back, it's draft week still on Locked On Canadiens. And I want to talk about the prospect of moving up in the draft and some of the math that comes with that as to whether or not you should do it. And we'll get into all that in just a minute. All right. We are back. It's draft week. It's almost like Shark Week. It's draft week here on Locked On Canadiens. We only have what is it? 2 more episodes after this before the NHL entry draft. One of the things I wanted to talk about, we've talked about a bunch of prospects they'll take in the first round. We will get into more analysis of the guys they pick in the later rounds after the draft. There's if you want a full mock draft, Corey Pronman at The Athletic made every single pick in the NHL draft this year. Absolute mad lad behavior. I have no choice but to respect it. Go read that and tell us what you think there. But I want to talk about the idea of moving up. It was something the Canadiens did in the first round for the first time last year in 2024. They traded up from pick 26 to pick 21 in order to secure Michael Hage. That was the guy they wanted to grab. They gave up pick 26, which was Winnipeg's, pick 57, which was Colorado's, and pick 198, which I believe was their own, for pick 21, Michael Hage. What do you think of, what do you like? Do you like moving up in the draft, or do you like that concept? Or do you like, just staying where you are and moving back and collecting assets? Like, what do you think at this point for the Canadiens is the better move?
I think moving up still, because they're still early in their rebuild. Like the playoff, making the playoffs should not skew their path. And should not give them unrealistic expectations of the future. I think they're still in a position to get good young players. And I would only move up, though, if there's the guy, right? Like if they have the guy, maybe the winger that plays on the same line as Ivan Demidov, maybe that number 2C. But you do have to remember that it's going to take a couple years for that, right? Or the Victor Hedman type player that I keep wanting this team to get, right? Like you move up.
I don't think that player is available in this year's draft, Laura.
That's what I'm saying, right? That's what you move up for. So if not, in the absence of that, move up, move down and trade.
Yeah, no, I think I always get nervous about moving up because you are trading several things for one thing, and it puts a lot of pressure on that one thing, right? That one guy that you moved up to get will have just that little added bit of pressure. I also wanted to get sort of a statistical analysis of moving up or down in the draft. So I found the Hockey Economist on Substack did an analysis of draft picks. They have a database of over 2,000 salary cap era trades. They isolated around 123 around draft day trades involving just draft picks, where one team traded 2 or more picks to get a higher pick. And they looked at the eventual NHL games played of those players. The team trading up got more games 54 times than the team trading down. They got fewer 53 times, and both got 0 16 times. So it looks like there's not much of an advantage to moving up. The number of times, this is directly from the Substack article, the number of times teams acquired a genuinely impactful player that's hard to find on the veteran player market is a small fraction of the overall trades. So the idea of moving up, it means that you really love the target you're going after. It means you have decided I cannot leave the draft without this player. And I just don't know that everything we've read about this year, especially in the first round, we're just talking about moving up in the first round here. Unless a player starts to slide, I don't know that there's a guy in this draft class that is kind of worth the assets that it will take to move up. It's going to take a lot to move into the top 10, almost so much that it's not even worth considering. You're looking, if you're the Canadiens, you're looking at somebody who could fall just outside of the top 10 and you can move up to maybe 11 or 12. And at that point, like, why? I just don't know that I don't know that it's an advisable strategy. The alternative being the Canadiens already have a ton of quantity, and maybe they see that they want to cash some of that in for quality. That makes it harder later on to then flip those things for things you need now. If you had 3 draft picks or 3 prospects that turned into that turned into actual prospects, you could trade them. But if you traded 2 of those to move up in the draft, now you have 1 out of all of those. You have fewer assets to deal with later on. So it's going to be interesting to see the Canadiens decide to do that. Looking back at the Michael Hage trade, was that good value? Like, it seemed like it was okay.
I think so. I think that was good value because for me, it was like they probably thought it was going away, right? They probably heard whispers or anything like that
Yeah.
this player was being targeted by other teams, and he was definitely one they had their eye on, right? The Canadiens seem to be very focused on, like, they have their eye on their man and they're going to do what it takes to get him. I mean, with Ivan Demidov falling into their laps, of course, like that didn't happen. That happened more by accident than by what they did. But in terms of other players, like, if there's a guy that you really think fits with your team, just like you were talking about yesterday, right? Like, the Florida Panthers don't get players that aren't Florida Panthers. And so Montreal looked at these guys, looked at Michael Hage and said, this is a Montreal Canadian, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and pretty easy to do. Kid grew up rooting for this team. It's a very easy story to get behind. I'm very much looking forward to the day that he's playing on this team. It's going to be a really fun.
Yeah.
That rookie lap's going to be great. Like, I can't wait to see that play out. I guess if you were to trade up in this year's draft, we don't need to go into exact targets because it's impossible to know what the Canadiens would want. Is it for a player who's falling, or is the fact that they're falling sort of a canary in the coal mine that maybe this player has something that scouts and general managers across the league didn't like? Like, it's sort of, we talk about Carter Bear, right? He fell because he had an Achilles injury. Okay, we know what that is. But other players will start to slide on draft day, like Shane Wright. Shane Wright's a perfect example. There was no way Shane Wright was getting to 4 on anyone's draft boards, and yet when it played out in front of us, it got there. So if you're watching a player slide, how nervous do you get? Like, why is this player sliding? And should I be, sort of against picking this player for that reason?
Well, that's why the Montreal Canadiens have 2 back-to-back picks so they can swing for the fences on a guy.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I also, back to the Demidov pick, I think it's funny that I think the Canadiens are very plugged in to what's going on. While yes, it was dumb luck that got Demidov to Montreal, I think the Canadiens had a pretty decent idea on the day of the draft that he was going to make it to them.
Yeah, but it's more that the other teams favored other things as opposed to taking the second best or third best player available.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago better hope that Livshinov hits, because the fact that they could have had Demidov next to Connor Bedard, and then they tried to trade back into the top 4 and couldn't do it.
That was really funny.
It's really funny. It could be a really bad footnote on that front office should they not turn Chicago back into a winner. But yeah, what do you? We'll leave the question open ended to our listeners. What do you feel about moving up? What do you feel about moving down? Does it make sense for the Canadiens to move back at this stage in the draft?
Only if they're getting immediate help.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, right? You move backwards and you grab, some kind of NHL option. Be kind of a weird move back, but Ken Hughes loves weird trades. He loves weird draft day trades. We've been constantly looking at our phones throughout this because we just want to make sure we do not miss anything. I know as soon as we hit end recording, Ken Hughes will make some kind of trade. So let's speed this up then and get to our trivia for today. Yesterday's question. This episode was dropping on June 24th. The last time the Habs made a trade on June 24th, they actually made 2 on the same day. In one, they acquired a player for 2 picks, and in the other, they traded a player for 2 picks. Who are the players involved in these deals? Do you know the answer to this, Laura?
One of them was Lars Eller.
Correct.
I think the other one was Andrew Shaw.
Correct. Both traded sort of back to back for one another. I was at the draft in Buffalo that year, and you could see Mark Bergevin talking to the general managers on the floor, and then he would they would walk to central registry together, so you could watch that sort of trade unfold. That's why this year the decentralized draft is going to be stupid. They should never do it again.
Yeah,
it needs to be.
I want to see the talking, right?
Yeah, it needs to be the big sort of party that it always is, and I think it's really stupid they're doing this. Okay, so yes, it was Andrew Shaw and Lars Eller. We had the correct answer from Paul Giardetti, Alexander Christian, Jeff Harple, and one Scott Matla, who texted us first thing this morning to let us know he got the answer right. All right.
You were both there at that draft, right? Did you meet?
No, we didn't know each other then. I just happened to be up there. I wanted to go to a draft for a while, and I was like, well, this one's in Buffalo. It can't get any closer. And then I think it was in New Jersey a few years later, which is super annoying. Anyway, today's question is about the Hall of Fame. As we wait another year for Carey Price's induction into the Hall of Fame, it has been a long time since the Hall has inducted a player who only played NHL games with the Canadiens. Who was that player who spent their entire NHL career with Montreal and got inducted into the Hall of Fame? Who was the last player to do that? If you have the answer, put it in the comments down below this video. Send it to us any way you know how, and we will shout you out on the next episode of the show. And that's going to do it for us today on this episode of Locked On Canadiens. Thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day, and for subscribing wherever you get your podcast. Doing that supports us here at the show and ensures you don't miss an episode. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. There's no offseason. They're bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter most, with local coverage that you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We're also available on Amazon Fire TV. Move to the Montreal Canadiens logo in the hockey section, and you can watch all of our episodes there as well. We are Locked On Canadiens everywhere we are posting things: Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. Come interact with us there. As we are watching the draft, we'll be posting some content there. We'll be working with the rest of the Locked On folks to get some content out for you guys. So be sure to follow us on all those channels so you don't miss out on anything. You can find me at Maybe It's Ian. You can find Laura at The Active Stick. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you guys tomorrow.